podcast.
I had something interesting happen to me this week. I was on a remote session, plugged in my microphone, check 1, 1, 1, nothing. What do you do? I'm going to get into that story. This is Build a Big Podcast, a marketing podcast for podcasters. I'm David Hooper. Bigpodcast.com is the website. This episode is what I call over, under, or accurate. I break the fourth wall here quickly to say that I've had a lot of insider episodes. If you've subscribed for a while, you know that. It's my newsletter. It comes out every Friday in New York time, and I do audio editions of that newsletter. Time to break things up a bit. So I'm looking at doing that. This is one of the ways that I'm doing that. Lots of options. You know, I wrote a book on this. It's called 101 Podcast Episode Templates. You can find it at Amazon. I think it's $1 now. The Kindle version is. 101 episode ideas. Most of them will also work as segments if you don't want to change up everything that you're doing. In fact, that's the best way to use these. Throw in a segment, see how it works. You want to do a full episode like that? Yeah, go for it. You got a lot of options with this book, 101 Podcast Episode Templates. Let me give you a website for more information if you're interested in that. Bigpodcast.com/books. This is how the format works. I'm going to go through 5 things. These are 5 things related to podcasting. You will know about all of them. You will have all of them, have experienced all of them, be thinking about all of them. And then I'm going to look at them and tell you, are they overrated, underrated, or accurately rated, in my opinion, and discuss each of these things. The first one, backup recorders. And backup recorders, way underrated. You've only got one chance to capture the moment. This is the story that I hinted at the very beginning of this episode. I was live on set. I needed to capture something that was happening at exactly 5:38 p.m. I was there plenty early, about 4:30. So I've got a little over an hour to prepare. One of the things that I did not do until about 5:36. So this thing's happening in 2 minutes. I did not check my setup. I checked that the power worked, but I didn't get the mic in, check 1-1, make sure the waveform is there, make sure it's being recorded, play it back. So I get to 5:36 p.m. Turn on the unit, hold the mic up to my mouth, check 1-1-1. Nothing. This guy's getting ready to go on stage. I've got to get it captured. What do you do? Well, I knew what was wrong. The question was I going to be able to fix it in time? I've got a portable recorder. I'm using it right now as a backup. It's a Zoom F3. It's a field recorder, 32-bit float. It's perfect for field work. It's a set it and forget it recorder. Turn it on, hit record, and it records. Unless you've got a setting on it that is wrong. And the setting in this case was the input was a line input, which is how I'm recording now. My voice is coming out of my interface, going into the recorder. It is a line signal. I was going directly into the recorder. I needed a mic level signal, not a line level. Changed it, got the tape. It sounded great, but that's worth mentioning here because if you get your backup recorder, you need to know how to use it. You need to know how to use it in different situations. Sometimes it's nice to have a backup of the backup, especially on a remote session. I was at a session, also important. This was actually an interview that I did with Dave Jr. from Megadeth. You may be familiar with that band, a legendary heavy metal band. Is it heavy metal? I don't know what you call them. Thrash metal. Kind of like Metallica. In fact, the other Dave of the band used to be in Metallica. So, live event with Dave Jr. of Megadeth. And for whatever reason, the setup's not working. I was with my engineer. She pulls out a Focusrite Scarlett. Not unlike the one I'm using right now as my interface. We're good to go. So sometimes a backup of a backup. And this stuff is way underrated because the moment would have happened. This guy who was speaking at 5:38, he was going to do that regardless of whether I was recording or not. I would have just missed the moment. Dave Jr., he would have been interviewed by me in front of that live audience regardless of whether it was recorded or not. But we wouldn't have had a radio episode of it. So backup recorders, way underrated. You've only got one chance to capture the moment. Second thing, daily podcasting. Overrated, underrated, or accurately rated. I'm going to say this is accurately rated. As far as developing your skills as a host, your skills as an editor, There's nothing that gives you a better opportunity than reps. And there are a lot of opportunities that come up when you're doing something daily. A lot of things to go wrong, a lot of things to go right, a lot of different people to interview maybe. So daily podcasting, yeah, as far as developing your skills, nothing gives you a better opportunity. The downside, and this is where daily podcasting is probably overrated, is that you can burn out your audience. People are busy. Do they really want to hear from you every day? Sometimes less is more. Make them want it a little more, man. 3 days a week, maybe? Yeah, okay. Once a week. When it comes to podcast growth, the thing that I've noticed is the guys that are hitting it about twice a week. Those are the podcasters that grow the fastest. They're there. They're consistent. It's pretty frequent. It gives people just enough to where they want more and just enough to where they don't forget you in between episodes. Once a week, that's okay. That's the second best option. Somewhere in between, also good. Number 3 on the list, interview format podcasting and also podcast guests. Let's put those together. Overrated. Most podcasters aren't good interviewers. The most common thing I see in podcasting is podcasters who are pretty good conversationalists. They're the life of the party. That guy, hey man, how's it going? Yeah, talk about anything, but not really get too deep. Those guys. I think conversations are a nice way for people to pass the time. And if you're doing a podcast that's a conversational type podcast, and you've got an audience that maybe they're commuting, they're in the car, they start, they stop, they're listening in the background as they work. That's not a bad way to do a podcast. Distracting people, entertaining people, that's valuable work. But you're going to have better long-term results from going deeper and having a focus. And that is what I call interviewing. It's not a conversation. It's something with focus, a beginning, a middle, and an end. I've got this guy coming on. I want to drag stories out of him. I don't want to just chit-chat. It's easy to burn through an hour or two with somebody. Hey, tell me about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Tell me about your family. Going with a plan or something. This is why I'm so big on a pre-interview. I was working on a project, doing pre-interviews. I spent 2 hours with one guest of 4. The other 3, fortunately, didn't take 2 hours each, but could have. That's what it takes sometimes to do that prep. There's the same bodybuilders know abs are made in the kitchen. You want 6-pack abs? It's not the weights you're lifting, the crunches, the sit-ups, whatever. It's what you eat. It's what goes into it. And I'm going to tell you that good podcast interviews, those are made in the pre-interview. Conversation, way overrated. The other thing that people overrate, guests are not going to bring you traffic. Guests do not promote episodes with an exception. And that's if you're an already established podcast and it's a big deal to be on your podcast. In my book, I talk about being on Saturday Night Live or Oprah. Name whatever big show you like. If you are on Saturday Night Live or being interviewed by Oprah, and there's a 2-hour primetime special, the Oprah interview, you're going to mention that to people. If it's just another podcast, especially if it's just another conversation, tell me about yourself. What about your family? Where'd you grow up? No. That's the same conversation everybody else is having with this guest. They're not going to promote yours. And that's the second thing. The guests are on a lot of podcasts. With very few exceptions, there's not somebody who's on your podcast that isn't on a ton of other podcasts or open to being on a ton of other podcasts. So for somebody who's searching for this guest, say it's a popular person, why are they going to listen to your interview or, God forbid, your conversation with that person? They're probably not, because they know somebody who's more popular, or they know somebody they've already got a relationship with or they've heard of even. They're going to listen to that guest interview with that person. That's why I think guests are overrated. Now let's talk about what's nice about interviews and also conversations. So if you're doing conversations, this is the good thing about them. It's easier for people to listen to 2 people talk to each other than it is for people to listen to one person monologue. I talked about switching formats on this podcast. That's one of the things that I'm thinking about, bringing in a co-host or rotating co-hosts. Same person comes in every third episode, every fifth episode. So you get to know that person. I get rapport with that person. We have everything scheduled, have some kind of system. I have those benefits of working with somebody, and also the benefit of having something conversational, which is easier to listen to. That's the big benefit of the solo podcast, is everything that I just said: scheduling, rapport, systematizing. It's all on you. You can do it anytime. You can do it as frequently as you want, or you can do it not so frequently. I talked about this guest prep. Pre-interview, 2 hours, one guest. If you know your topic, that is where a solo podcast is probably less work for you as well. You don't have to worry about pre-interviews. You don't have to worry about scheduling. Right now, I've got a phone with probably 5 or 6 people that I'm trying to get hold of. I've got an Instagram inbox with 5 or 6 people that I'm trying to get hold of. I am always reaching out to people, communicating with them, being ignored by them. If you're bad with rejection, podcast booking, bringing guests into your podcast, maybe not for you. That's another benefit of the solo monologue podcast. Let's dive more into that. Is a solo format podcast accurately rated, overrated, or underrated? I'm going to say accurate. It is the best way to establish yourself as an expert. It is the best way to control your schedule, your podcast frequency, format, everything. The downside is that it's all on you. You don't have anybody to blame if it's not successful. You don't have anybody to cover for you if you can't show up. Also, I would argue that monologues take a higher level of skill than conversations. Most people, they can handle a basic conversation. Interviewing, different thing. But a conversation, we've been doing that since we were kids. Anybody can have a conversation. Very few people can get behind the mic and do a monologue. Right now, I am 17 minutes into this raw tape. You can see how much I've edited. A lot. Big Podcast Supercomputer, give me the numbers.
This is the Big Podcast Supercomputer with a courtesy time check. You are now 12 minutes and 21 seconds into this episode. Approximately 5 minutes of tape, roughly 1/3 of what was recorded, has been removed.
That's a lot, and I've got experience. This is one of the reasons that I'm working on the solo podcast challenge. If you're interested in that, you want to get with me and some other people working on your solo podcasting skills, that is happening right now. Solo podcast challenge, reach out to me at bigpodcast.com for more information. Number 5, your podcast studio, and I'm talking about a dedicated space. Overrated, underrated, or accurately rated. And let me say this, it doesn't need to be fancy. I'm in a 5x8 tricked out closet. And by tricked out, I'm going to use theater of the mind here. The first thing I did was I had the 5x8 walk-in closet. It had things for hanging clothes. That was removed. Poles that you would put hangers on. Top level's removed. Bottom level, there are moving blankets that are hanging down. Now, I could have done that on the top level as well. Instead, what I did was I got a layer of foam, 12-inch by 12-inch squares, and I covered the entire room in it. On top of that, I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 massive rock wool panels, rock wool being insulation that is sound absorbing, that are wrapped in wood, and they have 2 cloths over them. This is a big building project. If you're interested in the plans, by the way, I will send them to you. You can make your own. If I bought these things, probably $2,000 or $3,000 worth of soundproofing. I made my own, cost me 1/5 of that. Still pretty significant, but this is more or less a dead room. I've got a computer. I've got the backup recorder that I mentioned, mic, processor, noise gate. It's not fancy. It's comfortable, and it lets me get the job done. Outside of this room, my wife has a photography studio. Tomorrow, there will be 4 people here. Got a makeup artist, a stylist, a model, and my wife. A lot of times, there are more than 4 people here. There's company people. If that were happening right outside this room, I would not be disturbed. They would not be disturbed by me. And I think that's important. That's why I think a podcast studio and a dedicated space, even if it's not something like this, that is underrated. Every successful creative person I know has a dedicated space to do their work. I mentioned my wife's studio. That is a dedicated space. She does not pull out the photography equipment, all the seamless backgrounds, the lighting, the cameras, every time somebody comes over. It is there. It is ready to go. I walk into my 5x8 room, turn on my machine. It is ready for me. I don't have to unpack it, pack it, unpack it, pack it. Oops, where's that cord? I lost it. Don't have to worry about that. It's going to make you getting into the flow so much quicker to have a dedicated space. No setting it up, no tearing it down. And if it's in your house, people know how to act when they're in that space, when they're around that space. When you go into your booth, don't disturb him. He's making a podcast. A dedicated space, something to think about, even if it's just the corner of your room. Don't tear it up, take it down, tear it up, take it down. Start where you are at the level you're at with what you've got. That's the space, that's the budget, the time, whatever you got, start where you are. I have found that is the best way to go about it. Less is more. Don't be like that guy who says, I'm going to get fit, buys a bunch of gym stuff, outfits, 10-year membership contract that you can never get out of. If you've ever joined a gym, you know what I'm talking about. Don't get all that stuff if you're not sure about your transportation and your schedule to get to the gym. Start where you are, then build upon it. If you got more questions for me, you can reach out to me at bigpodcast.com. If you want to work with me one-on-one, this is the way to do it. It's called Big Podcast AMP, A-M-P, that stands for Audio Monetization Program. You can find more information about it at bigpodcast.com/AMP, bigpodcast.com/AMP. There's a long letter there. It is from me to you. I talk about how I work. I talk about what I think that you need as a podcaster. Read it. If you got any questions, do reach out. bigpodcast.com/AMP. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, what are you waiting for, man? I'm here every week talking about podcasting, how you can grow your audience, get more people to your podcast, become a better host. And you can get it for free at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go there right now before you forget. Click the button you need. There's one for iPhone, one for Android, one is an RSS feed. Pick your poison, get subscribed, and I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.